Formula One's new regulations came with a ton of aerodynamic changes, and even though the wings and floors were the biggest contributors to the ground effect, it's the sidepod design that's got the greatest ceiling for innovation. So, after having a year's worth of data under their belt, teams are going back to the drawing board to nail down their 2023 designs. Will we see everyone converging toward one concept, though? Well, let's find out. First off, side pods are split into 3 different concepts. Before the big aero regulations came into play, we weren't really seeing any radical design differences between different Formula One cars. Like, if we dissect the entirety of the turbo hybrid era, we barely ever saw any team come up with something truly mind-blowing. Well, apart from maybe Mercedes, who was in a league of their own. All of that changed, though, when we got these new ground effect cars, which, to be fair, was pretty unexpected. Why? Well, you see, the goal was always to make parts simpler and easier to produce. But of course, F1 engineers are a different breed and came up with some insane side pod concepts. Mercedes, for instance, has the Zero Pod, which is easily the most radical of the bunch. We mean it literally eliminates any side pods and just has little vents for airflow. That said, it hasn't yet proven to be very helpful in eliminating drag. Also, there's a pretty high chance of this concept being scrapped for next year. Red Bull, on the other hand, has gone with the downwash solution, where the body sucks itself inside near the floor, and surprise, surprise, this one's a popular choice as both Aston Martin and Williams have also gone with a similar thing as it provides a lot more stability. Ferrari's also got a pretty radical design, with a massive sink near the vents to create that upwash effect by throwing the air upwards. Now, Haas is the only team copying this concept, but in all honesty, the Scuderia has seen some pretty significant success with it, and we don't see it changing for 2023. Up next, the side pod is only one part of the puzzle. When you're talking about aero solutions in F1 cars, there's not really a quote-unquote correct choice, and, more often than not, people gravitate toward the design of the fastest car. But according to Red Bull's technical director, Pierre Wack, side pod design's only a part of the puzzle, because you can't really make it work without crafting the rest of the car around it. So, you can't just stick Max Verstappen's framework on Alex Albon's car and expect him to go faster. On top of that, it can also be super difficult to find any extra benefit if your chassis is built around one concept and you put a different one on top of it. Having said that, Wack thinks that you've always got to head into the next season with an open mind, as any opportunity can present itself. Besides, one of the more important aspects of developing a car is to figure out a potential upgrade path. Like, if you can't continue to improve upon your initial concept after the first race, then there's clearly something wrong with your philosophy. Now, of course, even though Red Bull's arguably got the strongest aero package on the grid, they're still going to have to make a couple of minor adjustments for next year's regulation changes. For instance, they'll have to raise the floor edges by 10mm and also lift the throat of the diffuser to reduce porpoising. Oh, and even though these aren't exactly related to the side pod, these little things are still going to have a pretty huge impact on how the final chassis turns out. Not to mention, Mercedes has yet to nail down its 2023 car. It's been a strange year for the German outfit, as it's gone from dominating the Constructors' Championship for 8 seasons in a row to being the 3rd best team on the grid. And, even though there are obvious issues with the power unit and the floor, especially with all the porpoising, you could also point some fingers toward the Zero Pod design. We mean, when the Silver Arrows rolled up to testing with that insane design, people thought that the season was pretty much done and dusted, but things have been quite the opposite, as they've struggled to tame their car and find the right balance for their concept. In fact, at one point, the situation was so dire that the team's technical director James Allison even suggested getting rid of the Zero Pod for next season. That said, a good mid-season run has now sent Mercedes into a conundrum, and, according to the trackside engineering director Andrew Chauvelin, they're still not sure what their car's going to look like for 2023, as they're still exploring a bunch of different designs. Also, they're keeping a key eye on these slightly altered regulations, because that's going to throw a spanner in the works as well. Besides, if you remember, the team's been trying to fix its porpoising issues for a while now, with suggestions to add some extra bodywork to stop the floor from flexing. So in all honesty, the new regulations will probably help them. What's more, teams might converge toward Red Bull's design. Now, it can be kinda difficult to figure out where the teams are headed in terms of their design philosophy, but if the current season's any indicator, then we definitely hedge our bets against everyone converging toward Red Bull's formula. After all, they do have the fastest car on the grid, and, according to Chauvelin, it's natural for everyone to gravitate toward them. Like, even this season's given us a pretty good look at what's to come as both Aston Martin and Williams have switched up their concepts halfway through to be closer to the Milton Keynes outfit. As a matter of fact, the AMR22 picked up the green Red Bull tag just because it was so similar to the blue team. According to Aston Martin's performance director Tom McCullough, though, they'd already done the groundwork for the second car before ever seeing any other team. And when the first concept wasn't working out very well, they decided to revert back to the other direction. On top of that, he also emphasized the importance of being efficient with your cost cap. For instance, if you spend all your cash on coming up with the body part, then you can't really test it in the wind tunnel. So, for next season, they've got to make sure that they don't fall into the same trap again and have something that they can build upon for the rest of the year. The Red Bull chief, on the other hand, says that the Sidepod is only a single part, and other teams can't copy their design without fundamentally changing the rest of their chassis. Coming up, we've got the biggest design changes since the first F1 car. Now, the big aerodynamic shakeup isn't the only time we've seen some new regulations completely change the look of the cars. In fact, if you only go back a couple of decades, then you'll find that we're not even in the same stratosphere. So, when you compare these modern machines to the first F1 car in the 1950s, well, that's a completely different ballgame at that point. For instance, the old cars were bulky and carved out of aluminum with a steel frame, and it took over 30 years for carbon fiber to become the norm. Don't get us wrong though, the 2022 beasts are still super heavy and can weigh over 1,700 pounds. But again, that's in spite of the fact that they're basically 60% carbon fiber, which makes it all the more impressive. The real change, of course, is the way they look. We mean, apart from the open top and the slim wheels, you could totally see an old Formula One car driving down your local street. These days, it's almost impossible to get to drive one around with its extremely complicated floor and aero setup. Oh, and speaking of aero, that's perhaps the most important aspect of the current vehicles, as they're made to maximize airflow that can generate downforce and suck them onto the road. Like, everything from the massive tires to the suspension contributes to the reduction of drag. Besides, have you seen the steering wheel on those things? It's literally got a billion controls and modes that the driver has to switch while driving around at 200 miles per hour. Despite everything though, they're still some of the safest cars around, as drivers continue to walk away from some of the worst crashes you'll ever see. So, they truly are a marvel of modern engineering. Finally, how would a 1950s car perform on the current grid? It's not a surprise that Formula One has the fastest race cars in the world. We mean, it's the pinnacle of motorsport. That said, the real magic isn't their top speed or engine power, but it's their cornering ability. Of course, they can still hit speeds of upwards of 220 miles per hour. The speeds at which they can turn through the chicanes, though, nothing comes close to that. Oh, and just for context, the Alfetta that was driven by Nino Farina in 1950 could also do 180 miles per hour. On top of that, it did a 0 to 60 in around 4 seconds, which, if you think about it, would have been insanely fast for the time. Then again, it's nothing for a modern turbo hybrid engine that gives out 1,000 horsepower and does all of that in under 2.5 seconds. That's a wrap for this video. Which era of F1 cars do you like the most? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.